Interesting thing that the Prime Minister said that we outlined right at the beginning, how he spoke about the Macaulay mindset, which largely has defined how we thought about our religion and in particular about Ram Janmabhoomi. Why did he say that? What is this Macaulay mindset? We are getting you now two very interesting voices on the subject. Nick Booker, who is a co-founder of Indogenius, and author Amish Tripathi, both joining us on the show. Nick Booker, thanks very much for speaking to us. First up, we're talking on a very, very historic day when the Ram Mandir is finally made at Ram Janmabhoomi, the birthplace of Lord Ram. How do you see this moment as an observer of Indian culture? What do you make of this moment?
Namaskar, Padmaji. We are obviously at an incredibly important turning point in history where India's self-confidence is beginning to assert itself globally, geopolitically, economically, technologically, the diaspora spreading out across the world. And here in India, that is Bharat, it is, of course, unsurprising that self-confidence would manifest in the ability to create whether it be the Ram Mandir or whether it be some of the important projects that are being launched as well to do with digitization of Sanskrit manuscripts, something I was involved with earlier in the year. And that is, of course, the opposite of the trajectory that Thomas Macaulay wanted India to go on when he made his famous Minute of Education in 1835.
And this Macaulay mindset that has been spoken of again and again, how do you think the two issues, like why in particular did the Prime Minister mention that this is a mindset that has led us to negate our own history, our own heritage?
It is quite extraordinary. And even in 1835, it was an extraordinary thing to say. When you think of the influence that India and Indian ideas had on the rise of the modern world, including Britain, and not just, I'm talking about wealth coming from India to Britain, but also the ideas of mathematics and the scientific mindset that enabled through the mathematization of reality, which happened in the early part of the Middle Ages and then led to the Renaissance and to the world that Macaulay inhabited. Now, the other thing that's really important on education, and this is something that is really missed, is the fact that the first tens of millions of Western working class, British, Londoners, Europeans, Genevans, Swiss, Canadians, Americans, Pennsylvania, Quebec, all over Europe, Britain, and the eastern coast of America and Canada. The very first millions, tens of millions of working class got an education in schools which were designed around the traditional Indian education system. People do not know this. But there were two gentlemen, Andrew Bell, who was in Madras in southern India with the East India Company in the 18th century, and Joseph Lancaster, who saw how Indians in villages in southern India, but it was true across the country, were being taught. And you had Shudras and Brahmins being taught together. And the way that it worked was the master would find, the lead teacher would find a student who'd mastered the concept and then get them to help other students in the group. It was peer learning. They called it the monitorial method. They introduced it to provide the cheapest, lowest cost, highest quality, admittedly rote learning, but very effective way for Western working class children to gain the first ABCs. And Thomas Babington Macaulay in 1835 should have known that that is the system that had helped over the previous decades and had been inspired by Indian education system. An Indian education system which the British then dismantled in order to come up with what have been called factory schools, in the way that the children are in a room with a blackboard and a teacher at the front. And that was a very different way of learning. It was much more suited to a from the top down approach, textbook, education system, regulation approved, teachers, and so on. And that happened in the middle of the 19th century in Europe and America, came to India, of course. But the original system, monitorial method, peer learning, was Indian, and Macaulay should have known better.
Tell me
and that's not even including Gurukuls and Guru Shishya Parampara.
Amish, the fact that the Prime Minister said today that The Macaulay mindset is what has led us to even try and deny our own religious figures, the fact that Lord Ram was referred to as Kalpnik, that we have been told to have this sense of self-loathing if we want to be called modern. Do you agree with that?
Padmaja, this was a strategy I have seen not just in the Indian anglicized elite. This was a strategy that the anglicized elites across the non-Western world did. The anglicized elite in Egypt did it. The anglicized elite in Southeast Asia did it. The anglicized elite in Africa did it. Because it was the only way to survive in a Western dominated world. The only game in town was can you be a darker version of the West? Then the West will accept you and you could rise, right? And perhaps you could manage your own countries as well. Many of these elites believed that they were reforming their own land as well and bringing it up to modernity. As I said, they believed modernity equals to westernization. That was the conception in that mind. So, I think it's not just India reviving, it's also the relative decline of the West, which has opened up this space. It's not just India which is trying to decolonize. Non-Western countries across the world are attempting to decolonize, some successfully, some not so successfully. But this is a natural consequence of the relative decline of Western power.
You
Which is a
agree?
good thing, at least for those of us who are non-Western.
You agree with that, Nick? That there is an effort at decolonization worldwide? This getting rid of the Macaulay mindset, as it were.
We've seen waves of influence from India on the West for thousands of years. One of the more important ones happened in the early 20th century, so very much the modern period, when we had the biggest breakthrough in understanding, pushing the frontiers of human understanding of reality, happening in the world of quantum physics. And if you look at those key people, Max Born, Niels Bohr, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, each and every one of them had a deep fascination with Indian philosophy, with Vedanta philosophy. So if you think that Indian philosophy is somehow irrelevant to the modern world, well, it wasn't for the quantum physicists. If you think that Indian mathematics, I mean, take Babaja, if I may say, your surname, Joshi, somewhere along the past, you have ancestors who were Jyotish. They were astronomers. They were mathematicians. They understood the movements of the heavens. They were using mathematics, calculation, computation, developing techniques which took millennia to catch on in the West, in Europe, and in Macaulay's Victorian Britain. And in Macaulay's Victorian Britain, not in the decades around when he was speaking and when he was working, Ada Lovelace's teacher, Augustus de Morgan, George Boole, Boolean logic, true, false, logic gates. You have Charles Babbage, in fact, a number of the makers of the modern computational mindset, which give birth to the computers in the modern age, were also interested in India and Indian mathematicians and mathematics. So we've had this belief, Macaulay and others, about this mystical tradition, but actually India has both mystical and scientific, as mathematics, as well as an understanding of the deeper truths of human consciousness, and in fact universal consciousness. All of that happening in the same civilization, which makes it incredibly contemporary, incredibly modern, incredibly well suited for the 21st century, where on the one hand we're using maths to create large language models and computational capacity that supposedly will lead us to something approaching artificial general intelligence. And on the other hand, asking ourselves the deepest question of what it is to be human in that world. And I think those questions are questions that are best answered with a shelf of Indian literature and not a European library, which has all been turned into ChatGPT numbers, using, of course, Indian numbers and
You know,
vectors.
pardon me for us saying this, Nick, but then why is it that if it's so apparent to you that we actually have a very, very deep philosophy, that we are engaging with modern ideas as well, but all this while we actually have been told that we must get rid of everything that is there in our belief system in order to be a modern civilization, that holding on to even like a shred of belief would in some way make us, set in stone, or would make us very old-fashioned?
Yeah, well, I'm afraid it's ignorance and prejudice. I'm going to now quote from the Rig Veda before Amish does. Ano Badra Yantu Vishvata, Kvatavo Yantu Vishvata. May good ideas come from all over the world. Of course, there are great ideas coming out of Britain over the last centuries, coming out of America, of France, of Germany, that are incredibly valuable for improving quality of life of Indians, of understanding what it is to be human, of understanding reality, of building the modern world. But India also has those ideas, and whether it be contemporary, breakthroughs like UPI or Chandrayaan or Mangalayan, or whether it be ancient ideas on meditation, on yoga, or on Ayurveda, India has this wealth of experience, of experimentation, of deep truths, and they come from both this kind of right hemispheric, relational, contextual, open awareness, and this left hemispheric mastery, logic, rationality, mathematics. India does both better than anyone, civilizationally, for thousands of years.
Well, and the result is that we have a Ram Mandir, and we're also getting ready to go on the moon. We are ready to have more space explorations. We're ready to have an international space station. But talking specifically about the Ram Mandir today, Amish, I want to ask you personally, what was the experience like when you saw the Dharm Dhwaj go up?
Oh, so many. One had civilizational, as a civilizational Indian, civilizational Hindu, as a religious Hindu at a religious level, as someone from UP, my family is from Varanasi, at all levels, such deep emotions. One, of course, as I mentioned earlier, at a civilizational level, the symbolism of the Dhwaj, the Kovidara tree, the Om, the Surya, that is kind of like a civilizational memory, a revival of civilizational memory, a closing of a loop. That began with a tragedy 500 years ago when the Uzbek foreign barbarian Babur destroyed the Ram Janmabhoomi temple. For centuries, for 500 years, indigenous Hindus, not just Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, refused to forget. Jains refused to forget. And the temple was rebuilt, and the flag going up is the closing of that loop, because that is symbolic of the entire temple complex being completed. At a religious level, one feels it so deeply, because I'd gone to, as I said, I'm from UP. We used to go to UP very often. And I'd gone to Ayodhya in the time when Ram Lalla was still, as one of the speakers said, almost imprisoned. And there was a tarpaulin thing on top. I remember you had to go through a very long circuitous route. There's very heavy security.
Because there was a terror threat, yes.
I'd gone with some friends from Ayodhya, the royal family, friends of mine. The Pandit who was out there, had read my books, recognized, came and spoke to me, and he was crying. That बारिश होते ही है, राम लल्ला भीग रहे हैं, हम कुछ नहीं कर सकते, क्योंकि जब तक कोर्ट का आदेश नहीं आएगा हम टारपुलिन बदल भी नहीं सकते, लानत है हम पे. And I was crying कि भाई, what is the use of being an independent country? We can't even do this much. And now there's this grand temple, for as is befitting for our eternal king. Lord Ram is not just a god; he's our eternal king. But third, as someone from Varanasi, one feels it deeply for Vishwanath ji as well, Kashi Vishwanath ji. My grandfather was a Pandit there. He used to teach at BHU. One feels it very emotionally. But like Lord Nandi, we are patient. We'll wait. We'll not step back. We'll wait.
But you'll also keep watching, just like Nandi is also keeping watch on what is happening in Gyanvapi. But Amish, you also spoke of the civilizational stubbornness, despite physical attacks, brainwashing that has happened over time. Thankfully, in a way, luckily, we could never be civilized fully. We still kept believing that ye to Janmsthan hai, aur kisi din we will get back the Janmsthans, we will get back our articles of faith. And there are very few, actually. There's just 2 or 3 which you really stake claim to, Amish.
We are the only pre-Bronze Age culture that is still alive, the only one. Every other pre-Bronze Age culture is a museum piece, sadly. China is not pre-Bronze Age. Pre-Bronze Age meaning minimum 5,000 years old, right? And There are various reasons for this. I think we need to analyze why we survived these last 1,000 years. Because the same invaders who came here went to other lands as well. And they wiped out practically all the ancient cultures where they went. We are still standing after 1,000 years of these very brutal invasions. The Turks, they're all foreigners: Turks, British, Portuguese, Dutch, French. We are still here. Part of it is, of course, stubbornness. We refuse to surrender. Some battles we lose, some battles we win, but you lose permanently only when you surrender. Right? We never surrendered. But there are lessons, that of course we can learn from what our ancestors did well. We should also learn lessons from what they did not do well. And one of the things where I think our ancestors made a mistake was lack of unity. And we must not allow that to happen again. We're a vast country, 1.4 billion people, different languages, different communities, different rituals, different marriage traditions, different dietary habits, different clothing patterns, whatever we may have. We must remember, if you're an Indian, you're one of us. We must have that attitude. Otherwise, we may lose to another bunch of invaders.
Actually,
We should not be disunited. We should not repeat that mistake.
Perhaps some lessons have been learned, if very crudely translated into a slogan very popular now, Ek Rahenge, Safe Rahenge, is pretty much a gist of the lessons you think that we should learn from what we have suffered in the past. Nick Booker, any thoughts on that? How did India survive? If there have been waves of invasions that wiped out every other country, how did we keep standing?
You just mentioned, Amish was speaking of Varanasi. I was in Varanasi in 2009 and we experienced the total solar eclipse. So this extraordinary celestial moment when the moon blocks out the sun, all the life-giving force of Surya is taken away, drains, the sky darkens, the birds can't understand what's going on, the stars emerge. And there were millions of pilgrims with their chants to Shiva, to Vishnu. They were there on the guts of Ma Ganga. Their devotion and their practice stretches back thousands of years. Now, there was also a BBC crew there filming for a show called Wonders of the Solar System. Professor Brian Cox, the physicist, he gives a narration where he's saying, only science can predict this eclipse is going to happen, unlike the theories that once were prevalent in this city, Varanasi, Kashi. Yet, of course, Kashi is a seat of Joshis, of Jyotish, of astronomers, of mathematicians going back thousands of years, from not just the Jai Singh's Jantar Mantar of 1737, but stretching all the way back. And in fact, when mathematics came into China, Indian place value, decimals, Indian astronomy, it was actually Brahmins from Varanasi, from Kashi, Gautam Siddhartha and his descendants, who went to the Mughal, to the Chinese court, bringing Indian mathematics. So you've always had this very, very sophisticated scientific mathematical worldview based on observation, based on empiricism, and this deep faith, this deep connection with the rivers, Ma Ganga, with the mountains from Mount Kailash, all the way through the country. And it is that which gives India its continual strength, the ability to tell stories, to encode text, to encode knowledge in the stories, and also in the temples and the art and the music and the dance and from the mudras to the songs.
Absolutely, and I will just borrow a line from Allama Iqbal, which was quoted by the RSS chief very recently. Kuch to hoga aisa ki hasti mitti nahi hamari. There must be something in your civilization, whether it's stubbornness, whether it's innate wisdom, whether it's just an urge to never let go, that people have tried. They have tried physically, they have tried mentally, but they simply haven't been able to erase us. Thanks very much, Nick Booker, Amish Tripathi. It has been enlightening speaking to the both of you. Thanks very much for joining us on The Buck Stops Here. Thanks for watching.